Okay, so everyone, welcome to this session on domestic violence. This session is being recorded and will be available at the end of the conference, after the conference. My name is Morgan Estery. I'm with the Partners in Care Coordinated Entry System team, and I'll be the host for this session. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a question either in the chat privately to me. And then, of course, as we go throughout the presentation, feel free to add Q&As at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. There's a Q&A section, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. With that, I'll go ahead and pass it to Darlene to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Darlene Pires. I'm actually one of the shelter managers now of the Parents and Children Together domestic violence shelters. So we'll be talking more about those shelters later. And next, Margo, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Margo Sneed. I'm the program director for the Maui programs, which includes the Family Peace Center on both Maui and Lanai. Shyla?
Hi, my name is Shyla, and I am the shelter therapist for the shelter and the transitional housing for Parents and Children Together on Oahu.
I guess that just leaves me. So I am Ted Hayden. I'm the program director for the Family Peace Center programs here on Oahu. And I guess we will kick it back to start the presentation.
Yeah, okay, give me just 1 second. I will share my screen and give it over to Darlene.
Okay. Hi, thank you all for the opportunity to share with you what's happened to domestic violence services over the last few years. Morgan, can you go to the next screen, please? So just some history regarding domestic violence. Prior to the 1970s, there were no formal emergency shelters for domestic violence victims. Actually, when I did some research in preparation for this, I learned that prior to 1871, which is a long time ago, husbands had the right to actually assault their wives, which was shocking to me. It was in 1871 that the United States started to acknowledge that DV was a crime. But even though they did acknowledge that it was a crime, the law enforcement and the judiciary system still felt that it was a private matter. So not much came out of the fact that they recognized that it was a crime. In 1974, actually, the United States had their first formal domestic violence shelters. Prior to that, advocates who were working with survivors of domestic violence would actually bring them into their personal homes to keep them safe from their abusive partners. So with the emerging of shelters, advocates were now able to respond to the physical injuries that survivors were experiencing, as well as any emotional aspects of them leaving relationship and escaping the violence. In the 1980s, domestic violence intervention programs started to create a coordinated response, which included response and services outside of shelter. In 1994, Congress actually passed the Violence Against Women's Act. And that's when the community was able to get some, I guess, support behind further protections for domestic violence survivors. And today, what we find is the services that we provide have changed so significantly. Of course, not only are we just serving women now, we are serving survivors of all genders and whatever your sexual preference is. So everyone's actually welcome to receive these domestic violence services. We've also learned since I think about 2010 or 13 that survivors come to us with a lot of complex trauma. So our services, we found, had to adjust to be able to accommodate the kind of clients that we were working with. So I'm going to now turn this over to Shyla, who's really going to talk more about what these trauma-informed services entail. Shyla?
Next slide. All right, so what is trauma-informed care? So trauma-informed care is a bit of a buzzword these days, and so there can be a lot of confusion as to what it exactly is. And simply put, trauma-informed care means treating the whole person and taking account to their past trauma or traumas and the resulting coping mechanisms when attempting to understand their behaviors. So it's not necessarily saying that the behaviors are okay. It's not necessarily saying that the coping mechanisms that resulted from the trauma is good. It's just saying that that due to the trauma, this is why this person might be behaving that way. It doesn't necessarily have to do with me. It's more because of their past trauma. And something to keep in to account is that every person that you meet that has been assessed to be a survivor of domestic violence, they have experienced trauma, which is different from the trauma that can be associated with uh, with accidents, with even combat related. So unique experiences, unique challenges that domestic violence survivors have. Okay, next slide. All right, so you have this person that is either in front of you or nowadays over the phone or through Zoom, and this person might, you're trying to ask this person questions. This person might respond either angry, they might not look like that they're maybe engaged, they might be crying, they might be telling you like, hey, why are you, or asking you, hey, why are you asking me these questions? I don't want to answer these questions. And you might be thinking, what's wrong with this person? And the thing to remember is when you do when you do think that, when you do say that, what's wrong with this person, what happens in your mind is it automatically goes to, I don't want to actually help this person. So you create this divide, as opposed to when you think more from a trauma-informed lens, um, what happened to this person? So what happened to this person that got them to the point where they think that behaving this way is the only way um, to get services or to get help, and how can I make this person's experience different from maybe an experience that they've had before, like a bad experience that they've had before. So when you're thinking what happened to this person, your mind is more towards how can I help, as opposed to, oh, there's something wrong with them. And then if we want to go even further, because like what Darlene was saying before is that uh, through the time, things have changed. So now we recognize different genders, different sexual orientations, uh, etc. So going further, you want to think what happened to this person and their people and what is still happening now. So you have this, so let's go back. So we have this person, they don't seem very engaged, they might be angry, they might be asking you, hey, why are you asking about my social security? I already answered this question. But then you're thinking, okay, what happened to this person? And then you're thinking, oh, okay, this person just shared with me. Not only are they a domestic violence survivor, but they shared that they are transgender, they identify as female, and they are Native Hawaiian. So lots of layers, so lots of complexities. And so thinking about, okay, what are some of the experiences that this person may have had that may have resulted in them not wanting to share certain information with me, or or maybe, you know, it's one of the reasons why they're not, you know, super jolly or why they're not having a good day today. So less about me and more about the complexities of this person. All right, so next slide. Okay, so the impact of trauma. So these are just a few of the things that that you might see when working with a trauma survivor, specifically domestic violence survivors. Over control because they've had very little control in their lives, especially in their relationship with their abuser, because their abuser, they had all the control. And so now they're almost overcompensating and they want to have control of everything. Um, Difficulties trusting, difficulties telling the truth. So that is really common in survivors, because they're afraid that that something might happen, that they might say something and they might get hit or they might be called names, because that's what happened with their abusers. So when they're talking to other service providers, they're automatically their mind is going to protective mode. So they're thinking, okay, um, does this person know my abuser? Is this person going to think that that I'm not telling the truth? So maybe I should tell them what they want to hear. So these are some of the things that go through a survivor's head, because after a trauma, after something traumatic happens, then your brain automatically goes into survivor mode. And so you're automatically thinking like, okay, like how can I help myself? How can I make sure that I stay safe? And so making sure that when you are talking to to anybody, but especially to survivors, that your the questions that you're asking, that it's not punitive. So that if if they don't want to answer it, then is there an alternative, you know, question that they can that you can ask, that they can answer, and just making it a safe place, so that way they feel comfortable uh, telling you more information about them. Um, and oftentimes they might have interpersonal and social skills deficit. And so what that basically means is that they might not say hello, they might not say thank you, they might not say some of the things that some of the gestures that we're used to, because during their relationships they were taught to walk on eggshells. And so that could come off as that might come off to some people as, oh, they're not grateful, or oh, they might just be abusing the system. But oftentimes it's because they are afraid, and that is something that they learned to do. They learned to not speak as much as possible. And then we have things like self-harm, addictive behavior. And again, that goes back to the coping mechanisms that they learned through their trauma. So, um, so they might be, you know, cutting themselves. They might be on drugs. They might be on alcohol. But again, looking at the whole person and recognizing that this behavior that they've done, it was in order to get them to the place that they are right now, sitting with you, doing this assessment or answering these questions, and and making them feel like eventually that you don't need to do that anymore. So that goes back to making it into a safe space for these clients. All right, next slide. Okay, so trauma looks different on everyone. So sometimes we think that a person that is experiencing mental health or that is experiencing a lot of trauma. They might be presenting like hostile, angry, paranoid, but which is all true, they can, but they can also appear, quote, normal. So, so both could be experiencing a traumatic event, but the way it shows up can be very different. So both could be experiencing major depression, both could be experiencing dissociation, which literally means that your mind is going back to the place of trauma. So sometimes if you've ever seen a client, when you're doing an assessment with them, or when they're in court, or when they're uh, in a certain situation where you're talking about the trauma, then their eyes glaze over. Most likely they're experiencing dissociation. So it means that they've been triggered, and their brain, because like I mentioned before, it's in a place where it automatically wants to go into survivor mode. And so any mention of triggers, any mention of any type of triggers, any type of stressors, um, it goes into protective mode. So it wants to shut you down. And so sometimes sometimes with trauma survivors, it can be very debilitating. Um, the triggers, because of the dissociation, because of the depression, and because of the fear that they might end up in that situation again. So a lot of times, like I'll have clients who will lose hours in their days and not even know it because they were dissociating. So they could just be in the bathroom, or even when they're driving, they just go into autopilot mode because their brain goes into this survivor mode. And so it wants to protect it, and which makes it difficult. I mean, it makes it okay because that was one of the coping skills to get them to the place that they are right now in front of you, but they no longer need it. So that's why it makes it difficult for them to get jobs, get housing, to maintain certain things. Um, so yes, so being able to recognize that. All right, so next slide. All right, so I already talked about dissociation, which is one of the psychological responses to trauma. And the other one, which I'll go into more detail, is the fight, flight, freeze, or collapse response. And it just goes back to what I was just saying, is when someone has experienced trauma, especially for domestic violence survivors, afterwards your brain is in a hypervigilant mode. So it is always looking for ways to keep you safe, and even things that do not seem like they would be dangerous, but it causes stress. So let's say a meeting with a housing coordinator, that could cause stress. And logically, the client, the individual, might know that, hey, this is not a dangerous situation. This is just, I'm just doing an application. But the stress that it causes is very different from the stress that you and I might have. So the stress, it mimics the bodily sensations that happened during their traumatic event with their abuser. So even though their mind, logically, they know that, hey, this is just a meeting, it's okay, but the stress that is causing is telling its mind, what the brain is doing is saying, no, okay, cut it off, shut down. So that's where the fight, flight, freeze comes in. So your brain wants to prevent any sort of stress from happening, which again, it was good. It made sense when you were in an abusive relationship or when you were in that traumatic situation, because your brain needed to do that. It needed to freeze, it needed to fight, it needed to run away. But now that these individuals are out of that situation, they no longer need to do that. But in order to so they have to retrain the brain, which takes a while and it takes a lot of patience from us as providers. So next slide. All right, so these are, I'm not going to go over every single one, but these are just some of the fight, flight, freeze responses. So sometimes when we think of fight, we think literally like you're going to punch somebody, which is not true. It does include that, but it can be crying as well. That could be a form of fight. It could be obviously like the flexed jaw, the ham fist, feeling anger, even homicidal, suicidal feelings. That is a fight. So fight is like a response, like a very intense response to the stress, to the trigger. The flight, it could literally be, running away from something. So let's say like a meeting or a job interview. Those kinds of things. If you see your client when you're talking to them, they have big darting eyes, they're not breathing very well, shallow breathing, their legs are constantly moving, so their knees are constantly shifting. That's a common trait for a lot of DV survivors when they're doing assessments. They freeze. So quite literally kind of going numb. So you're asking them questions. They're not really, it's either yes or no question, yes or no answers. They're not going into detail. You might see that they're very stiff. They might just be holding on to their bag. And they might be holding their breath as well. So it could be a really good idea, when you're having these assessments, especially like if you don't know the client very well, just to model breathing, just taking a breath like every now and then, drinking a glass of water. So that way you're reminding them as well to take a breath, to, take a drink of water. So that way they ground themselves, that way they bring themselves back to the present. Because remember, holding your breath, it sends a signal to your brain saying that you're in danger. So yes, so all of these things play a factor in why certain clients that you meet might be dodging you, or might not seem like they want the services. It might not be that they don't want the services. It might be because they are struggling with just an inner battle in their head, and feeling very unsafe. Okay, so next slide. All right, so re-traumatization. So this is something that so for the most part, it's unintentional. So a lot of times we don't know that we are doing it. It's not our intention to hurt somebody. It's not our intention to traumatize somebody, but we have to take the steps in order to prevent something from happening. And if we do find out that something is traumatizing or could be traumatizing, we should take steps in order to prevent that from happening again. Okay, so when we talk about domestic violence survivors, and when I said that it's very unique, I mean if you're looking at the relationship, the power and control. So this is what they compare, pretty much what survivors compare pretty much everything to. So what is all based upon when it comes to their behavior. So in a power and control relationship, they're not being seen, they're not being heard. The trust is violated. They're looking through people's phones, they're asking for their phone numbers, for their the password to their phones, they're wanting access to their email. So yeah, so really intrusive, no trust, failure to ensure emotional safety, non-collaborative, does things for them rather than with them. So they really have no say, or they really did not have any say in their abusive relationships. And use of punitive treatment, coercive practices, and oppressive languages to pretty much keep them down and to keep them aligned. So that's what they're used to, and that's what they fled. And so they come into, systems in domestic violence shelters or in the homeless, or trying to get housing, trying to get jobs, and they're kind of faced with with very similar, unfortunately, with very similar um, similar tech. I don't want to say tactics, but very similar things that happen to them when they're trying to get the help. So one being they have to continually retell their story. Um, so so try to prevent them from having to do it multiple times. So if you have, let's say, an intake person that's asking them over the phone, um, and then they have to meet another person after the intake person, make sure that they're not having to retell the story, that that other person has read over the notes, and if there's any questions that they have, then those are the questions that they can ask, but not to constantly have them repeat the same sort of information over and over again. Being treated as a number. So again, with all trauma survivors, and especially domestic violence survivors, they're very unique. So very unique situations. And so no two people are the same. You might have similar stories, but not the same as the other person. And like we said before, there could be a lot of layers in that trauma. So just because you have two women, or just because you have two LGBTQ folks, just because you have two people of the same age, it doesn't, and they're all survivors, it doesn't mean that you treat them the exact same, because remember, no two trauma looks different on everybody. So remembering that procedures that require disrobing. So that doesn't literally mean taking off your clothes. It could also mean having to tell them information that that doesn't necessarily pertain, to what they're wanting. So if you're just curious, about, oh, why didn't you leave sooner, or why didn't you tell a friend, or what happened with this, or oh, how did you get away from that? So being mindful of that, and making sure that that you're just asking the questions that you need to ask, and not making them feel like they have to answer, every question. Otherwise, they're going to not get the housing, or they're not going to get the job, or they're not going to, be accepted to the program. And being seen as their label. So we have domestic violence survivors who could be, addicted to certain substances. They could have schizophrenia. They could have bipolar disorder, but they are definitely more than that. And so being mindful of that as well. No choice in service or treatment. So again, that is a very key thing, because in their power and control relationship, in their abusive relationship, they had absolutely absolutely no say, or very little say as to what they can do and what they cannot do. So making sure that they're with you every step of the way, that you're not creating the plan for them. And if they don't want to, stop drinking, coming up with creative ways, to help them, get into that program or get help that still aligns with what the client wants to do. So no opportunity to get feedback about their experience with the service delivery. So always making sure, or trying to make sure that they do have an opportunity to voice, their concerns, and that is a safe space to do so, and making it confidential as well. So either they can, talk to somebody, talk to a manager, giving them a number where they can easily reach a supervisor, or or giving them a survey as well, so that way they feel like they have the power to say that, hey, this didn't go right, or that didn't go right. So it's all about empowerment. All right, next slide. Okay, so here are the primary principles for trauma-informed care. So safety. So creating a space where people feel culturally, emotionally, and physically safe, as well as an awareness of the individual's discomfort or unease. So the coordinated entry system, they did a pretty good job in creating a document describing like how we can best serve survivors. And it is about enhancing the trauma-informed care access and being creative in the way that we provide these services to survivors. So safety being a huge thing. So creating a confidential space, maybe using white noise devices so that way they feel like other people cannot hear them. Um, and now, because of COVID, offering several different ways, different means of communicating with the provider. So whether that be phone, whether that be Zoom, whether that be I don't know. So just being creative and offering multiple ways for victims and survivors to speak confidentially. Transparency and trustworthiness. So providing full and accurate information about what's happening and what's likely to happen next. So that basically just means don't beat around the bushes. Let them know what their likelihood is of getting that service or getting into that program that they want to get into, what they have to do in order to get into it. And so that builds trust, that makes them feel like, again, which I'm going to go to next, is that they have choice. And choice is, again, one of the main key things to combating trauma and to prevent post-traumatic stress from happening, because you want to feel like you have some sort of control and that you have choice again, because choice was taken away from them before, and now it's our opportunity to give them some choice back. So it includes recognizing the need for approaching them that honors their individual dignity, and just making sure that they're okay with whatever that they're wanting to do. So even if you believe that, hey, this program might be better, or no, you should get this type of housing, or no, you should get this type of job, if they don't want that. So honoring that. Collaboration and mutuality. So recognition that healing happens in relationships and partnerships with shared decision making. So you are not in the driver's seat, they're in the driver's seat, you are the passenger, and you're not telling them where to go, but you're just there for company, and you're just there to basically just be present with them. Empowerment. So it's not that we speak for them, it's that we make them feel empowered enough to voice, how they are feeling. So they have the voice, they just need to be empowered to use it. And the way that they feel empowered is by all of these things, by feeling like they're in a safe space, transparency, giving them choice, feeling like this is a partnership rather than you're the expert in my life. So they are the expert. So they know what to do, and they've gotten themselves out of quite a bit. And so that definitely needs to be recognized. All right, next slide. All right, that is it for me. So thank you guys. Who is next? Is it Darlene? Okay.
Helps if I unmute, right? Thank you, Shyla. Every time I listen to your presentation, I'm reminded about all the work that we need to continue to do in our shelters. But Shyla is actually our trauma champion. I mean, every day, whether we're talking about a client that might be a bit of a challenge, she'll remind us that to always look through that trauma lens. So thank you, Shyla. We appreciate it. So I'm going to touch on emergency shelters. You know, and this is not unique to PACT. Basically, I think all emergency shelters work the same way. We may have a different shelter hotline number. I have ours posted there, the 808-526-2200. And the primary reason for emergency shelters is really to provide safety to survivors who are fleeing or attempting to flee a dangerous situation. We do start our safety planning from the time we receive that phone call, whether they choose to come to shelter or not. Staff is trained to find out what the circumstances are. We do a quick lethality assessment, and try to safety plan as best as we can. We can provide transportation. We can arrange for transportation as long as it's a safe location. We would never send, you know, transportation, a cab or a lift to someone's personal home, especially if there was an incident that, you know, had recently occurred. And in our emergency shelter, they can stay up to 90 days longer if we request an extension from our funders, and usually we get that. So yeah, and again, everyone's welcome here, regardless of whether you have disability, your gender, or your sexual preference. So next slide. So again, our emergency shelters, you know, we have kind of, you know, when you look at this hierarchy of needs, right, you see this everywhere. Human beings have a basic need for they're fulfilling their physical needs. And really that's what we try to do. When someone comes to our shelter, a lot of times they don't have anything. It's a typical situation where, you know, someone's coming, they have no money for food. They were able to grab their some personal items, their important papers. You know, we try to guide them to do that when they call us on the hotline call, but sometimes they don't. So we have food here, we have clothing. We can assist them with, you know, financial, whether it's a Foodland gift card or a Ross gift card to take care of what they need to do. Safety needs we take care of. Safety planning, like I said, occurs from the time we get that phone call. When they come into shelter, we safety plan with them, because now safety looks different now that they're in shelter. We want to really stress the issue of confidentiality. We don't want the person to find out where you are. So, you know, coming in and out of the shelter is going to be an issue. So that definitely happens. And then throughout the stay, and then when they finally leave us, we do a different kind of safety planning for discharge, because now they are leaving the safety of the shelter and they're moving on to another location. We also try to fill their social needs. You know, through COVID, it's been a little bit difficult, but we're starting to resume some of our social things. You know, with the holidays coming up, we had Halloween activities for the kids. We're planning Thanksgiving. You know, prior to COVID, we would do different things, take the families fishing on weekends. So we really try to, you know, establish that normalcy and they can start bonding with other survivors in the house, and hopefully, you know, support each other, because they all have that common past, I guess, of being DV survivors. If we're fortunate and if the survivor stays in our shelter long enough and can work through the top 3, we will start looking at, you know, self-esteem needs. That could vary depending on, you know, the individual in terms of what they feel. You know, we focus on strengths. What are some of the areas they feel that they need to work on? So yeah, that's basically what we focus on in emergency shelter. And next slide. So, and I know that Shyla touched on this. She did indicate that every survivor situation is different. And just like every domestic violence situation is different. We don't do cookie cutter here at PACT. We really don't. Every case is different. We do a thorough comprehensive assessment when they come in within 7 days. If that doesn't work, because sometimes survivors need more time, you know, depending on the circumstances and how they came into shelter. If that takes longer, that takes longer. But when they're ready, hopefully we can do a comprehensive assessment. We look at safety, we look at children's needs, we look at their housing experience, we look at, it's very long. And we do it at their pace. And, you know, with as much information as they want to share with us at that point. So we do recognize that we cannot treat all of our survivors as equally, you know, because everybody has a different situation. We try to be equitable. So as you can see from this diagram, you know, some people are going to need more support. Others can be in shelter for a couple weeks until they get what they need done, and then they're right back to, you know, being able to get out in the community safely. So, but others will require more time. Next slide. So these are the safety options that we currently offer or try to offer our survivors. And again, stressing the issue of choice and circumstance. We do have transitional housing. At PACT, we currently have 2 transitional housing. We have one for single females, and then we just recently got through pilot funding, we got one for single, and we have for survivors, whether they have children or not. Okay, and our focus are really for the survivors who have, for that transitional, for survivors who have barriers to employment. So it could be like little children, and childcare is an issue, or maybe they have immigration issues that they have to address before they can actually work. So that would be the target that we would be looking for that particular transitional housing. We have rapid rehousing through HUD. We had homeless prevention last year, and I think in the year before, but we don't have homeless prevention now. Hopefully we can get it again. But, you know, that provides, so going back to transitional, not everybody goes into transitional because, you know, sometimes a survivor needs more time to continue the work that, you know, is not done in the emergency shelter. And it allows them more time to actually prepare for permanent housing so they can be successful. Some people are, some survivors are ready. They're, you know, they're employed, they're good, they're safe. So they want to get their own place. So we can offer them rapid rehousing. And then what the homeless prevention did for us was, if possible, if the survivor could stay safely in the current home, because maybe the perpetrator left the survivor with all the bills, and, you know, so maybe the survivor needs some little bit of support to get on their feet and stay in housing. That's, you know, something that we would definitely want to support. The advantage of doing this is that with the resources that they have, that safety net of continuing to work with their DV advocate. You know, we'll work with them for a year. They'll continue to be our client, and we can support them. They might be doing well, and then something happens, you know, so we have to support them again. The other option is, for many people, is to go with families or friends, because, you know, the transitional housing might not be available. They really are not in a position where they can sustain their own place. And, you know, especially in Hawaii, you find a lot of multi-generational households. So family and friends is a good option. You know, if you notice at the top, it says safe housing options. It doesn't say permanent housing options, because again, DV survivors are a little different now. So our focus is, we are looking to place these survivors in safe housing. You know, that's how we measure our success. So it could be with family and friends that they've reunited with, because now the DV has been addressed. You know, we find that many of our survivors, families have cut ties with them because they haven't been willing to leave their abusive situation. So as they see the survivor working through this process, they start to reunite with their family. And so family and friends could be an option. And then one that I know those of you who do work in the homeless field know, permanent supportive housing is like gold, right? I mean, not everybody can qualify. There's a long list, but there's definitely a need for permanent supportive housing for survivors. You know, many of our survivors are like in their late 50s, early 60s. You know, maybe they get Social Security. Some of them maybe don't even get that. So we're really challenged to find, especially if they don't have family or friends that can support them, we're really challenged to provide them with housing. So yeah, that's still a work in progress. But next slide. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over now to either Margo or Ted to talk about out of service, out of shelter services. Okay, thank you.
Hi. So basically, Margo and I will tell you a little bit about our intervention services for DV survivors, offenders, as well as child witnesses. Our services are fairly similar on Oahu, Maui, and Lanai. So we'll go over kind of the similarities first, and then we'll talk about some of the differences. So for our judiciary contracts is primarily working with DV offenders in our Kuleana program. So that is clients who have been referred generally from a judge, whether it be family court. Sometimes the TRO court judges will ask them to do DV services, things like that. We also do anger control groups for men and women. And then we have our survivor program, which is the Pu'uhonua program. And so that focuses a lot on safety planning, on group. We do some individual in there. We also can assist with temporary restraining orders and court accompaniment. So we'll actually go with them to the court dates to provide additional support for that. The Oahu program, we do have a trauma therapist that can do individual sessions, short-term trauma therapy with the survivors. And then that will help to kind of stabilize them, get them in a good place, and then help transition them into long-term therapy as needed. For our children's services, looks like we forgot to put it on there, but we do have the Halpoa program, which works with child witnesses domestic violence. That is primarily group services, but we also can do some individual services with them as well. Then for the older kids, we do have the Naupio program, and that's working with teen anger control as well as if there is DV. And there's a few minor differences in the Naupio program on Oahu and Maui. The Oahu program is primarily individual, and then we also do groups for the boys and the girls in DH. Of course, right now we're not, that's kind of on hold. But once we get through the COVID, that should resume as well. On Maui, it's primarily group setting. Under our Family Peace Center programs, we can also accept self-referrals for all of our services in that. And then if you go to the next slide, we'll talk about the DHS contract is a little bit different.
So the Department of Human Services Child Welfare Services contract, basically the difference is that we're serving the whole family, and very often we will get both parents referred to us as well as the children exposed to domestic violence. And in that program, we are able to do supervised visits and child exchange. On Oahu, they have a separate supervised visit center. On Maui, we all do it down at Ho'okahi Street. We also do the individual dyad and therapeutic counseling with the protective parent. We do home visits. We do parenting groups. And in the parenting groups, we may have, two parents that are not together that, are going to learn how to co-parent separately. We may have parents that eventually will be back together. It just depends on what the situation is. We also help with transportation assistance if they have a hard time getting to groups. Right now, most of our groups are done remotely. I think for Maui, the only groups that are being done in person are now PO teen anger control groups. We also have a really neat program on Maui for the Batters Intervention Program. So a person can be referred either while incarcerated and continue with the classes when they get out, or they could, be in group with us in community, and then maybe something comes up and they end up being incarcerated, and they can continue those groups while incarcerated. So it's a really nice way for them to be able to continue their services and not have a gap in time. And now Ted will tell you about their Heart and Soul program.
Jump forward 2 slides.
Oh, sorry. Did I say?
Your MCCC stuff, but that was what you just talked about.
Okay.
Yeah, so one of the other major differences for our programs is on Oahu, we do have our Heart and Soul program, which is placed under our children's services, under our Halpoa program. But this program works primarily or exclusively with children who've experienced sexual abuse. So the primary client in that, of course, is the child. And for them, we do group as well as individual counseling for them. But this program is really unique. And one of the things I really think is great about it is that it works with the entire family because there's a lot of complex issues going on in that family. So we work with the primary client, the child. Then we can also work with their non-offending siblings. And we have separate groups for them to deal with kind of the issues that come up in that setting. So there are group as well as individual sessions working with the siblings. And then we can also work with the non-offending parent or caregivers of those children. So for them, we do have, additional support. So teaching them, how to talk with their child, talking about how to talk with their child about some of the things that we're working on with the child in the actual services. So how do they talk to them about that? How do they work through some of the behaviors that they might be seeing, things like that, as well as just providing that additional support for those non-offending parents or caregivers. And then along with that, we can also do mentoring and life skills for those children. So as they progress through our program in the more counseling side, then we can also work with them for mentoring and life skills, and we can work with them a little bit longer term in that section. So it's a really great way to help them transition and help them heal through that process. Right. Go to the next slide. One of the other programs that we have within the Family Peace Center, so this again is with both on Maui and Oahu. I won't go into too much of it because we don't have a lot more time, but we can also work with, or we are working with, in conjunction with Susanna Wesley, child sex trafficking services. So we do primarily the case management side of that, helping them get to all of their appointments, helping them with basically everything they need as they go through their own services and their own treatment. So kind of the 3 main areas of trafficking that we're looking at here is the recruitment side, the main sections for the forced labor. So looking at the different percentages of trafficked children is here. And then kind of the main control methods. Again, I don't want to go into it too deeply because we could do another presentation just on this, this alone. But we are always happy if you have any questions or anything about it, then please don't hesitate to give us a call and we can talk to you about it. So if you move on to the next one, it's a little bit more in the trafficking section. So these are the types of control or the types of sex trafficking that we see in Hawaii. So familiar within the family. So the family is actually trafficking the child. Survival and recreational. So this is them trying to survive. A lot of the times, they may be homeless. So they're doing the trafficking of themselves to just survive and get through. Gang controlled is really just the whole trafficking system is within a gang and they're running it, as well as finally pimp controlled, which is looking at there's a pimp potentially having what they call a stable of trafficked kids in that way. Okay, go on to the next one. So Margo, did you want to take that?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So the mandated reporting. So the mandated reporting is a little bit different than the regular child abuse and neglect mandated reporting. So there's a separate phone line for reporting as well as a separate mandated reporter checklist for that. So the information is here, the Oahu reporting line, and you can also call that for the outer islands too, I believe. Then there's kind of a national reporting line. And then if you need more information, the Hawaii website is actually pretty good. I should have put it on here, but it's humanservices.hawaii.gov has all of that information there, and you can find all of the numbers and contact information. And then I also have here I don't know if you can click on this link from the PowerPoint, but this link is to the mandated reporter form. And the form is really great. It's really detailed. So if you have any questions or you have any suspicion that there might be trafficking involved, I would suggest taking a look at the form, because it gives you some really detailed information about if there's suspected things. It talks about the different types of control and the different kind of warning signs or things like that that you might see in a child that has been trafficked. So it can kind of walk you through that, and you can check off the boxes, and it'll give you a good idea of, you know, what might be happening. And then
Next slide.
to the next slide.
So PAC
Turn it over
programs
to Margo.
address, yeah, PAC programs address the whole family, whether they're together or not. We're trauma informed. We teach people how to go through the group process, to learn about domestic violence, so that we don't have this constant generational trauma. We offer education and increase survivor self-esteem, and we try to build resilience. And family may include extended family. We work with grandparents, resource caregivers, parental figures, whoever it is. Next slide. We believe in the power of relationships, building those relationships and making them strong. If the parent and child have a bond, the family is strong. If the family is strong, the community prospers. And that's the reason we start with parents and children together. Next slide. So these are our phone numbers if you would like to reach us. The first three are our family peace centers, and the last one is our DV shelters and our crisis line. Mahalo for attending our presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you guys so much. That was great. We do have one question in the chat that I think we could pose to the group. Okay, here's one. How often do you see survivors returning to abusive situations, and how can we help empower the survivor in a way that teaches them they can be independent?
We do see survivors come back often, and it's just that it's very, very difficult. And the statistics say they could return up to 7 times, maybe more. You know, it's really, really hard to get out of those situations, and having that support that our programs give them, having community support, having family support, all of that helps them get out of the situation. But you know, we all have to hold hands together through all our agencies, through the court system, throughout the whole process, for someone to be able to feel safe enough and to have the housing and the support through groups to be able to get out of a DV situation.
And I wanted to comment as well, if I could, on that. We've had survivors who've gone through emergency shelter in transitional, and they make the choice to go back. But what we've done is we've made it so that it is their choice. They know that there are other options up there for them. So they are the best judge of their lives. So of course, we let them know what it's like, right, to not be in an abusive relationship. But if they choose to go back, we feel at least satisfied that we've given them options. So that was the only thing I needed to say.
Yeah, and the door is always open for them to come back at any time for services, anything. From a phone call to the shelter, to groups, to individual counseling, whatever they need help with, parenting, we're there for them.
Yeah, to add to that, really quickly, I think one of the best things that we can do to help survivors through that process is to let them know that we're there to support them in whatever they do choose to do. Because we know that I believe the average is 7 times that a survivor will try to leave before they can successfully leave, is that we don't get really discouraged. We don't get down on them about, why you keep going back and stuff like that, but just being supportive and helping them because we know it is a process, and there are many, many barriers for a survivor to actually leave that relationship. So being there to help them through that process and, continually updating, their safety plan and just making sure that, they can be as safe as possible in that process, because when they are actually leaving is right, the most dangerous time for them. So again, right, just making sure that we're supportive and helping them through the process, because oftentimes through the kind of the process of domestic violence, the power and control, a lot of times it ends up pushing away a lot of the support systems that the survivor might have. So it's important for us to be there to help support them when they are actually ready to leave.
The likelihood of them actually leaving sooner and reducing the likelihood of them needing to do that 7 times is by giving them, the support. So that way they don't feel isolated. So providers having that open door, just like everybody was saying, and also providing them with the education as well. So how to identify red flags, the resources, like what Darlene was saying, letting them know about the different resources. So once they know that, the likelihood of them leaving sooner next time, if they do decide to go, is a lot greater when they know that there is support out there, when they know that, oh, okay, I believe that he can change, but oh, okay, I remember what Shyla said about those red flags, during group, so giving them access to those kinds of things. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. We are just past 11, so I want to just thank our presenters one last time. Thank you guys so much for sharing all of your resources and explaining to us more about the domestic violence system resources, what trauma-informed care is. Thank you guys so much. I did put into the chat the link that will take everyone back to the conference, the landing page, to then find the sessions that are taking place at 11, if you want to click on that. And again, this session is being recorded, so it will be available after the conference. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.